And this week, it was actually really quite interesting that I went to study with a medical doctor who originated a work called medical massage. Not that I'm working with people or doing hands-on work these days very much, but over the years, I started doing massage therapy about probably close to 50 years ago. In fact, you heard my original massage therapist, Dr. Patrick McGann, dear friend, and he's the first one who put his fingers into this pair of shoulders that were like boards back then. And actually, he invented a whole different form of therapy using his feet because his hands couldn't take digging into the hard, rock-hard muscles that were my shoulders and back, which now are nice and soft and supple, having cleared out some of that old trauma. So I went mainly with the work I've done over the years, realizing that the body is the storage system for the mind, and in particular, the storage system for trauma and stress. Having worked with massage therapists in 4 different continents over the last 50 years, and I've been in Bristol and been doing exchange work actually with a massage therapist here, and I have not seen a massage therapist yet that has been able to do the work that she has done. And her teacher, who originated this modality called medical massage, is a Russian medical doctor, and has been doing the work he's been doing for about as long as I have in the mind realm. So it was interesting, and whenever I get the chance to enter into the energy field of a master, I like to go and do that. So that's what I did. Really quite an interesting week or weekend. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and it kind of gave me a different perspective on all of the work that I do. It was interesting. This man is extremely science-based, physical. He talked about the body, he talked about the nervous system, he talked about the brain. Did not use the word mind once through the process. And so it was interesting to just be with that perspective and be impacted by what he had to share. And what really opened up for me, Friday was a whole day of lecture theory, and then Saturday and Sunday were hands-on work. And you know how I'm often talking about being the thinker apart from the thought, the feeler apart from the feelings, the actor apart from the actions. Well, for me, there was an experience in there in the first day of being able to step back, not just from observing what was going on in the room and the material being presented, which was just superb material, but to step back and observe my own mind in this process and realizing what the experience was for me. And it's kind of part of the experience of working with the Aramaic, what the Aramaic has brought to me over the last 5 decades or 4+ decades, was stepping back and experiencing the fact that this whole energetic creation has been handed to us, and this magnificent device called the body-mind unit, and he just brought that out. So, I mean, that's like his focus, and has been for decades, was physiology in the body, and what's happening with trauma and how to clear trauma out of the body. But it was just interesting to hit this point of realizing that this whole thing we call creation, including this multi-generational database called the body-mind unit, is really here for us to bring our original will into expression in the world. You've heard me talk a couple of times about the creation story, creation story tells us in the Old Testament that the Creator created this so-called physical world, created the human being, and then said, go forth and multiply and replenish the face of the earth. And most everybody, obeyed the multiply command, and sadly condemned themselves for it, which is pretty crazy. Another whole layer of trauma. But there hasn't been an understanding of this word replenish as it comes to us in the Aramaic. And the best understanding I can garner of it from the years I've been working with it is that what we were being told was to bring the creation to completion. And most everybody wants to figure that out. We've talked about the number one pseudo-solution of the non-being mind is if I could just figure this out. And you can't figure it out because the mind isn't capable of that. It's not what the mind is there for. It was interesting this whole weekend the word mind wasn't used once. I found that just rather interesting that it's the whole material perspective. But the realization that came from me as a kind of a culmination of this was that what you're looking to understand, what you're looking for, cannot be known, because this mind of man, this function of physiology that we call a storage system that functions as what we call a mind, and it really isn't a mind. It's just a storage device running its content. It can't know that. It can only be experienced. And it can't be experienced through that mind. It can only be experienced by opening up to the being that we are as human beings, because what we're looking for is what is looking. And if you're looking through the eyes of man's mind, then you're looking through a self that isn't, and everything gets interpreted through the self that is nothing but a memory bank, nothing but a replay of generations and generations, and where we're designed to be replenishing, bringing the earth to completion, bringing that higher perspective through energetically into this world, and using this device called a body-mind unit to translate it into creation. That if you're looking through that mind and that false self, Yeshua talked about in order for you to live, you've got to die. That self has got to go. Even if you've reached the pinnacle in what men would call accomplishment, you listen to Yeshua and he says that's the very lowest when it comes to the next level, to the realm of being. So this work that Yeshua developed 2,000 years ago, and it's a question, it's a pursuit that's been going on since the beginning of creation. It's about looking through the eyes of the self that is, and those eyes aren't physical eyes. What we call physical eyes are nothing but replicates of the mind painted on the inside of our eyeballs. It's interesting that animals in the wild are preyed upon, as many people become the prey of predators in the human realm. What we would call for a human being sympathetic dominance in that fear, flight, fright, freeze, fawning mode. The animal goes through that over and over and over again, but they don't originate thought disorders. They don't live out of the thought disorders of their generations. And what Yeshua understood in the Aramaic, at least my take, and what he gave was a set of tools to free ourselves from the thought disorders that keep us stuck in the mind of man, as humans do. The animal doesn't do that. They don't live in that trauma world, and they don't get all the symptoms of that sympathetic dominance that humans do, even though they may be repeatedly attacked. We were given as human beings, if we can ever break loose from what this mind, which again, the mind can be brilliant, it can do awesome things in the world, but it can't originate. And we as human beings are designed to originate, not replicate, not play out what the other generations have put into this device called a body-mind unit and put into our family systems, into our world. And what Yeshua's teachings are always doing, where the Greek translations are always pointing us toward something already expressed in the creation and how you got to follow rules and this and this and this and this. What Yeshua was always pointing toward, rather than to the realities output from this carbon-based memory system called the body-mind unit, finite system, was to the actuality of the creation and our role in it and our ability to originate and bring the creation to the next level. And if we fall into the thought disorders of the mind that's been through trauma and not known how to resolve it, the animal doesn't have the thinking capacity, at least as far as we can tell, to originate mind energy that says, oh, I've been traumatized today, I'll get traumatized tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and then cooperate in creating it. And there's where Yeshua comes in with the Aramaic forgiveness process, where he shows how precisely to collapse the projections, collapse the repeating patterns of the mind. Why is this happening to me again experience? And recognize that the whole energetic creation is here to delete what the generational patterns are that have been passed into us in this body-mind unit. Forgive, that's what the word forgive means. And then how to originate into the creation through this vehicle, the will that was given us, the true purpose that was given us, to bring that into full expression. And if we do that from our original being, then we live as original beings. Otherwise, an unauthentic replicate life is all we get to have. So if we never rise to that level, if we never free ourselves from the loud noise of the trauma-based mind, then the tendency is just to play out the patterns of the power person that are stored in this multi-generational database called the body-mind unit. And if we never go beyond that, if we never do anything but replicate that, then we're not alive. We're just, it's no different than a computer. It's just a replicating computer. Oh, it can be fun, it can be pleasurable, it can be sad, it can be painful, but it's nothing but the replication of the past. So we were given this awesome ability to originate, and rather than falling into the past, bring in something new. And that this whole energetic creation is there to serve you as a vehicle to bring your will, your original purpose into expression. Otherwise, the stored multi-generational database just plays out once again on automatic recycle. So it's about stepping into being alive. If we experience people through our wounds, through our memories, then the tendency is going to be to just repeat the unresolved traumas, experience people through those traumas, and so, oh, that's like that. That's like that one thing. The mind of man is expert at spotting patterns. Forgiveness is about breaking those patterns and to stop lashing out from the unresolved generational patterns and change that game so humanity gets to step into what our human lives are really about. And so our work with the Khabouris Manuscript, wherein I'm not sure what the 7th or 8th session, Jeannie has put a special page on the website where she has turned these into files that are playable on YouTube. They're, strictly speaking, video files, but they're actually audio tracks with a picture in the background. And she's got a page on the website. If you go to whyagain.org/EnlightenmentStudy, I believe it is, Jeannie. then you'll find those links. And if you've missed any of the shows, you can go back right from the first one. We're only in, I don't know, number 6, 7, whatever it is. And so this published so far from the Khabouris Codex, and what the imprimatur in the Codex tells us is that, and the imprimatur would be somewhat like a notary's signature would be today, verifying. And what the imprimatur tells us is that it was a 10th century copy of a 164 AD Aramaic text. And what we're going to be looking at is, we're going to cover the introduction, how the manuscript was found, some of that, some of the stories around that. And then we're going to look at some select passages from the New Testament, which are published in the book, and where those things are published or printed, the key words in Aramaic are left in brackets. And you can then go into the third section of the book, which is a first century dictionary. 25 of the world's top Aramaists did this work back in the 70s. And one of the primary things they worked to do was to establish the first century meanings of the words of Yeshua. And my offering is that virtually every key word out of the Aramaic, and we've talked about this many times over the years, but every key word, really truly key concept, has been exactly reversed. You know, Vladimir Lenin was a man who's probably responsible for more deaths in human history than any human being that ever lived. And he insightfully wrote that if you change the meaning of a culture's words, you can destroy that culture. All of the key words of the man Yeshua were turned backward. For instance, forgiveness now becomes, I'm going to let you off the hook for what's happening inside of me, rather than I'm going to go inside myself, own what's happening inside of me, and move through it. The word love has become something to do with sexual athletics or self-sacrifice. And it's amazing how many people are about this suffering game, misinterpretation. Sacrifice comes from the root to make sacred, not to suffer. Yeshua did not come to show us the power of suffering. He demonstrated the power of living a human life, living as the presence of love. You remember when he's confronted with the high priest servant, who's in the context of our language would be the arch enemy. Virtually every heroic person of the human realm would say, here's the arch enemy. All I need to do is kill this one, and then everything will be okay. And what Yeshua does is stops the man who's trying to kill him, and then he functions as a human being. He heals him. And I've had people who hear that and say, well, but Michael, did you notice I got him dead? Like I noticed I got him dead, did you notice they couldn't keep him that way? And the reason that they couldn't keep him that way is because he lived an original life. He lived an original being. He knew who he was. And as a human being, love, the only possible expression is that of love, that of compassion, that of extending love to, even in that case, the arch enemy. And that's what allowed him to walk through death. And it's interesting in the Aramaic, they talk about resurrection in the Greek as though it was over and then he came back to life. But in Aramaic, the passage more talks about this man Yeshua went through death. Not he got lost in it, but he went through it and came out the other side. And so we're looking to garner an understanding of how this text can guide us in that direction by building the brain cells for a mind that can go, the mind of man, the mind of the body, carbon-based memory, can never give the actual experience of what's happening in the actuality in any given moment. When corrected, it can bring us accurate data and accurate information about what's happening in the moment. And that becomes a platform for awakening the higher faculties and stepping into the actual experience of life. So back in the 60s...
You have a hand up.
Well, let's say a quick hello to our hand then. Or a long hello,
it's Susan,
whatever it requires.
Area code 610.
Hey. Hi, Michael.
Welcome
on the road. Hi. I have two questions, but the second one just popped up when you said Jesus went through death. In the mythology of Christianity, and I don't know the origin of this, he harrows hell. Is that the same idea? He goes through death? Or is that something completely different?
My take would be that being awake as a being, as the created essence that he is, not as a body-mind unit, he was able to stay conscious in what would knock the average person unconscious, and they'd get lost in whatever that expression was, and in that case, suffering and death. You know, how many generations behind all of us is there this belief that death is, it's over, it's done, it's finished, the end, pain, trauma, loss, you know, isolation, you know, on and on goes it all. But rather that instead of being lost in the trauma most people are lost in around death, because like my take is if someone's dying, whether it's oneself or a loved one, the trauma experience has nothing to do with the person who's dying. The trauma experience is what one holds in their own carbon-based memory that's unresolved about death, and two, what's unresolved with this individual. That's where the suffering comes from.
Yeah.
And so if one has completed that, then they can be in the presence of death and walk through it rather than get sucked into the trauma-based mind and the trauma-based generational patterns. Does that make sense to your question? Or if
that makes sense. It doesn't answer the question, but the question's not really important. It's just popped into my mind. There's certain artwork, and there is, I don't think it's in Scripture, but the lore of Christianity says that Jesus spent some time in hell and redeemed all the dwellers of hell during that time between his bodily death and his resurrection. I think it's part of one of the creeds. He descended into hell and he rose again. Anyway, it's not important. It's just one of those things that we get attached to our religion. But you're saying something a little different. It might be the same, but it doesn't matter. That just popped to mind. I was curious about it.
Right. Well, my take would be that the work, that descent into hell, that's what he asked for support from his disciples for when he went to the Garden of Gethsemane. He went into the Garden of Gethsemane and went through the final resolution of what was held in his carbon-based memory. And, you know, as a naturopath, and we've talked lots about healing crisis and what healing looks like.
Yeah.
The physical, mental, emotional symptoms of healing are identical to the physical, mental, emotional symptoms of disease. The energy going into the body, when it's being processed out, it's going to look the same. So he gets the intuitive hit that it's time for him to go through his final exam. And he's not too sure about it. He goes into the garden. First of all, he asks for support from three of his disciples, takes them with him. They sit outside. He goes in, and he's like, Father, can this cup pass from me? I'm not sure I'm ready for this. And obviously, he's told he's ready for it. Go for it. And what happens? You know, we're told that he literally sweat blood. And my take is, if one were going to go into and clean up so that their literal physiological energy field could be eternal, go back to removing everything based in trauma, fear, rage, hatred, vengeance, war, removing all of that, the healing process, the healing crisis would look like sweating blood. And we're told that's what he did. And we're told in that same story, you know, he took on the sins of the world, and that's used as a way to beat people up. See, you did it. You drove the nails.
Yeah.
I remember, let me think for a second about his name. There's an artist who sang a song, Take My Mother Home. Famous black man, just awesome voice. And I'm not remembering his name offhand, but I can remember as a kid being involved in churchianity, listening to this piece of music, Take My Mother Home. And he's singing about, you know, I think I heard him say, you know, like, don't let my mother observe what I'm about to go through. Take her home. I mean, I can remember, and they did it with sound effects, and you could hear the whoosh of the hammer, bang, banging in the nails.
Wow.
I can remember as a kid the trauma of that, and taking that on. It's something I've worked on resolving, and as I'm speaking about it now, another layer of it's coming up for me in terms of grief and what we have pounded into us. But he wasn't. It wasn't taking on the sins of the world as he's going to take on and suffer for everybody. It was the privilege and the honor and the blessing of saying, oh, I've arrived at a space where I can be the presence of love to embrace all of this and bring it to healing for humanity. Anybody willing to come along? I mean, if you want to keep, you've got free will. If you want to keep your trauma, it's okay. But I'm here to support it being lifted and transmuted. So it wasn't taking on the suffering. It was taking on the energetic patterns that needed to be healed and being so powerfully connected with love and having handled so much, or having handled his own generational and cultural trauma, that he could be that space. So it was privilege, not suffering.
Oh my God! If everybody knew that he didn't die because they were such awful people, what a healing that would be.
Yes.
Oh,
and unfortunately, the mind of man has taken that and turned it into another way to beat humans up, another way for everybody who hasn't resolved their own power person dynamic to pass it on to the next generation, rather than, here's the goal, arrive at the place where you have so cleansed your own carbon-based memory, your own mind of man or woman, of trauma, that you could be the space of love for any trauma that shows up, and hold space for healing, to be the hem of the garment that brings healing to anybody and everybody, whatever level of society they're on. So he was, my take is, in the garden, it was privilege, not burden, privilege. And that's when he stepped out. He said, okay, I'm ready for my demonstration. And he confronts Peter, and he tells Peter, if you're stuck in your carbon-based memory, you're in Satan. You know, get thee behind me, Satan, for you think in the mind of man. And I'm living in the game of God. I'm living in the active presence of love. I'm in my human life. I'm not in my mind that's got all this fear and trauma and turmoil unresolved and screams and pain and trauma and hate and fear. It's just like, and so when the high priest servant is standing there injured, he does what a human being would do. He offers healing. Even though he knows the man's going to shred his body to pieces. He's proven he can do it if he knows that's coming. But he's standing as the presence of love for the archenemy. And that, to me, is like the symbol of one having arrived. Now,
and then he gets
not having arrived fully myself and having challenges that can still bring my hostility or fear up, I recognize there's more work to be done. And, of course, we teach best that which we most need to learn. So we go layer by layer, strength to strength, and keep moving through those layers, understanding the principles, move on to the next level. And to me, that's what the Aramaic is always pointing us toward. The Greek are always turning it around, changing the meaning of the words back toward, oh, look at what you did. I can remember being told this as a kid. Your sins drove in the nails.
Yeah, I know.
It's like,
I know.
to an innocent little kid.
Yeah.
And then you know, we tell people, or the world tells people, and churchianity tells people, and You got to realize that you were conceived in sin. The very act of a sperm and an egg uniting in the delightful gift of sexuality that God gave to men and women, you were already a sinner. I mean, it's just insane. When you hear you hear the Creator in the Scriptures talking about who told you were naked? Like, who even gave you any of that crap? There's nothing of that in the actuality, but the unresolved traumas of men. Oh, that's just terrible stuff. You know, sex is dirty. Save it for the one you love. That's what I wrote in my book.
I know. Oh man. Well, then he gets on the cross and demonstrates the true meaning of forgiveness by seeing the innocence of all those guilty people.
being the space, seeing not through the mind of man, but being attuned to the higher energetic actuality rather than the individual realities based in unresolved trauma.
I've got another question. It sort of zeroes in on one thing. When I was training as to be a psychotherapist myself years ago, we were doing transactional analysis. That's what they called it.
Right.
And one of the things they called various aberrations, maladjustments in the human psyche by various names, and one of them was, they called them drivers. And if you wanted to really be pleasing to other people, to get love and get attention, they called that a please me driver, which is a little misleading because it turns it around. But in any case, a couple of times you've talked about fawning. And I'm wondering if that's the same thing. And so anyway, I'd love to hear and how is that a function of what, depression, or there's some connection I'm not making about that.
Well, my take for that one would be that when one goes into sympathetic dominance, one of the things that happens is, in order to enhance the possibilities of survival, blood flow is shunted away from all of the higher functions of the human form, all of the unnecessary functions. And it literally closes down the blood flow to the frontal lobes of the brain. Like, you don't need the faculty of solving a calculus problem if a lion's chasing you over the fence. Right. So that is shut down. And when it comes to the human realm, we've been filled with these power person dynamics, these power person messages that are, quote unquote, lovingly passed from generation to generation. The messages usually start out with, you're broken, and your survival depends on me. So remember, part of the power person dynamic, three things occur in order for a power person dynamic to be instilled in the mind. One, this person, usually a parent, though not always, has more power over you than you do. Two, this person who's got all the power is not functioning as a human being, is not functioning out of love. And three, the child, the object of that situation, is experiencing the situation as survival. So the self, a false self, Yeshua talked about, in order for you to live, you've got to die. The self we're talking about living is the created human being called love. The self that we're talking about that has to die is the one that's based in trauma, hostility, and fear. And that if we're living out of that self, then when higher blood flow to the brain is cut off and the higher fat is not available, all that's left as an advisor is this non-being self that thinks that it's in a survival situation, and the only way to survive is to please whoever it's standing in front of. Okay. And it doesn't matter whether this is, once this is installed, if it happens to a child at 3, then at 6, when that's activated, they're going to try to please. At 10, at 20, at 30, at 50, at 90 years of age, if that's not resolved, there's still this, in order to survive, I've got to please, I've got to fulfill the goal of the person in front of me. I'm not allowed to have a self that is independent of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be my definition of fawning. In survival, when that, I'm rolling along, there's no stress, and I'm in the office, and everything's cool, and, if the boss, gets a little snarky, I can say, hey, you just take care of yourself. I've got things, and I can do that. But if I come to the level where, and this third level of behavior in the power person dynamic happens when one is ultra-stressed. If I go into the office ultra-stressed, because this morning I had the morning off, I had a wonderful time, I'm buying a new house, I just bought a new car, I went to take care of some wonderful business, and I have 8,000 stressors in my mind, and I walk into the office, even if they're wonderful stressors, if I'm in that ultra-stressed state, and the power person or the trigger for my power person dynamic, the boss, gives me a snarky look, all of a sudden, what do I have to do? I got to survive, and that's fawning.
Mm-hmm.
What do you need, boss? Okay, I'll give up everything that I have just to please you and take care of you.
Yeah.
Would be the fawning mode, and it's just the automatic decision kicking in with that unresolved power person dynamic. And if one realizes they have a tendency toward it, what I see the Aramaic doing over and over and over again is pointing us in the direction of forgiving that dynamic within ourselves. So that no matter what happens in the world, full blood flow to the higher centers of the brain and everything to do with thriving and digestion and elimination and reproduction and regeneration and healing, all of that is active continuously, that we never go into that compromised state where, because we think something might eat us, although there's nothing in the office that's going to eat us, we act as though the lion in the jungle's after us and withdraw all of the blood supply, all of the oxygen supply, all of the nutrient supply to all of those higher functions and sacrifice that for the ability to have strong muscles to either run or fight and take in enough oxygen through breathing, which is another aspect of that sympathetic dominance mode, to take enough oxygen to fire those muscles so that survival happens. And that's the moment where it's, I think, key importance to do the forgiveness process, to engage in healing the power person dynamic.
Yeah.
Does that fit for your question, for what you were thinking of?
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Michael. Very good.
Awesome. Well, anything else on your mind at the moment?
Only that I have two sisters in health crises, and I was wishing we could be Canadians and help my youngest sister die. She has never taken care of herself, so they call her deconditioned. She fell over in the grocery store, and they took her to the emergency room, and it's just that she doesn't do anything but lie in bed all day and watch television. And she eats very poorly and very little now, even though she spent her life overweight most of the time. She's lost a great deal of weight, and I just talked to her, and she says, life is just too hard for me. I wish I could die. She can't eat, and I'm going to visit her and make her some chicken broth to see if she'll eat something. I'm not sure that's the best thing. I'm thinking maybe if she stopped eating, that's supposed to be a gentle way to go. I wish I could help her die, but I have quite a bit of fear around this. I haven't been afraid of my own death as much as I'm afraid of hers, and I'm not sure. That's a lot of worksheets to be done on that. That's not something we can handle right now on the radio show, but I'd love to have, if you would keep her in mind. Her name is Joanna, and I've struggled with her. Yeah. J-O.
How about a mind shifter?
Sure.
How about a mind shifter? How about just a simple mind shifter? It's safe and healing.
Hang on. All right. I'm ill prepared for this. Okay.
safe and healing.
For Joe to die.
Oh, yeah. That's not a problem. I think it's, anyway, yeah, I think it would be very good if she did. I think she's just run her course, and she's feeling very guilty about needing help and needing everybody else's money, and has for years lived on with food stamps and rent assistance and family helping her out. She feels a great deal of guilt about all that. She's not in a good way. But it's safe and healing for her to die. That's not a good, I don't think that's a good mind shifter. Maybe, yeah, go ahead.
Well, you did talk about trauma. You said you were okay if you did, but not her. So notice your mind shifted into a different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what you said a moment ago was, well, it would be safe for me to die, but there's a lot of trauma around her dying, was the basic message that I heard, unless I misunderstood.
Oh, no, you didn't understand. I did. I can see it all now. I guess just getting her there is the hard part.
So how about in my presence? And perhaps one of the things that she needs is just permission. You know, Jeannie's dad struggled for some time until Jeannie gave him permission, and literally within an hour and a half he left his body very, very consciously.
Oh, wow. That's something. Yeah.
And so
thanks.
if there's any part of you that wants to hold on or has some fear or trepidation, perhaps if you process through that, you might be a more powerful space in giving her permission and being the energy platform to just let go.
You know, Michael, you're hovering right near it. My sister and I we took different paths early. I was the fourth kid, she was the fifth kid. And she remained in a victim mode. The world had to give her stuff or she'd be miserable. And that's been the story. And I remember deciding early on that I didn't want to do that. And I better grab hold and get what I needed for myself, because it was up to me. And I've had a great life. And she has had, what she says is that she's very bright, very talented, but she has wasted it, and she feels terrible about that. But she doesn't focus on that much. Mostly she's in angry, blaming mode, but when she gets very real, that's where she goes. And I think I've been angry at her for my whole life for not choosing better for herself. So I have a lot of work to do on that. No need to take the whole program on it. Worksheets coming up.
Well, we'll hold the space for that to open for both of you, and for whatever's appropriate. You know, maybe she's been playing this game for a long time with you, and when you let go of it, she might just brighten up and go, oh, well, hey, I'm ready to do something different. And maybe she'll be ready to let go, but whatever it is, it will be done from love instead of from trauma. For both of you.
Yeah.
Be my take. Sounds like your lungs are still doing some letting go.
Man, this has been the slowest, fatigue and coughing up. At least the stuff is moving out now. It was a hard cough for a long time. But, yeah, it's taking a longer time than it might have.
Lemon and cayenne pepper might help.
I do that, Michael. You told me that a year ago or something, and that's my morning introduced thing. Lemon, cayenne, and a little clove, too, I heard was good.
Yes, cloves, excellent. And a little bit of maple syrup to balance the tartness of the lemon.
Ooh, that's nice. I've been off sugar, so I've not done that. Is it okay to do that if you're not eating sugar in general?
Yeah, well, sugar, refined sugar is simply a pure white powder, nutrient-free poison. Maple syrup has nutrients in it. There are the nutritional components so that it doesn't go in as pure sugar and overload the cell. It's kind of like with the car, if you put pure gasoline in a car, an automobile engine, the engine will burn up. It'll stall out and quit. You have to have a mixture of air with the gasoline so that the engine can use it properly. It's the same thing. The fuel for the cell is sugar, but it has to have the nutrients that go hand in hand with it. The poison is when you have just the pure white powder. So maple syrup is loaded with minerals and nutrients that give the body the challenge of having to digest and take the sugar out in a time frame that makes it functional for use by the cell.
Okay, thanks.
All right, young lady.
Well, are you on your way home now, Michael?
I am. Yeah, I'm just about an hour from home.
Oh, okay. Safe travel.
I was down in Fayetteville, North Carolina for this workshop this weekend with this doctor.
Right. You were telling about it. Very interesting. Yeah.
It was a very interesting, very powerful weekend for me. It's been a long time since I've sat in somebody else's workshop. It was a nice reminder. I mean, I've done, in my early career, I did dozens and dozens, put together everything I've put together over the years, dozens of different workshops like this. And it was nice to just sit back and be the student and be fed by this giant intellect and this fabulous body of work called medical massage.
Excellent. Welcome home. Hello, Jeannie. I'll get off, Michael, and let you carry on.
All right. Be blessed.
Thanks. Thank you.
Any thoughts for you, Jeannie?
No, it's all good. And no other hands are up, so I'd go for it with the intro.
All right. So the Khabouris manuscript, Khabouris, or sometimes it's spelled B-O-U. You'll see it. There have been a couple of different standards that we've gone with, but one we finally settled on back in probably the early 2000s was Khabouris Codex. Was purchased back in the 60s by a former partner of mine, Dan McDougall. Dan was an attorney in Atlanta, Georgia, from a fairly well-to-do family of attorneys. And he became interested in the prison system and wanted to find a solution, and ended up coming to the Aramaic teachings of Yeshua as key. And he sent an expedition to the Middle East to find a manuscript like the Khabouris, and it is a copy of, as I said, a 164 AD text that was copied, according to the Mature, in the 10th century. The whole of what is considered to be the New Testament canon is included in it. And it was called the Khabouris because it was found in a monastery in the Khabouris River in Turkey or Kurdistan. The monks at that particular monastery were known as a group that were called the Nestorians. And it's interesting that Dan and Yonan, I understand it was the two of them, were there at this monastery, and because of the dearth of understanding from the English perspective, the man who was the head of the monastery offered him the manuscript, and he made a donation or paid for it and left with the manuscript. And best of our knowledge, it was about 3 days later that the government swept into that monastery, and as far as we know, all of the monks were killed, were murdered. And so there's an article about it in the Istanbul Gazette on June the 11th, 1966. And fortunately, Dan was there and rescued that manuscript before government factions went in and, as far as we know, obliterated the place. So it's Syriac Aramaic. There are different dialects of Aramaic, and I am not an expert or a scholar in that arena at all, or in the pronunciation of the Aramaic, but it was written on sheepskin. And you can look at the manuscript if you go to whyagain.org/Khabouris, and I think it's a spelling Khabouris. Maybe you can check that, G. But if you look, you'll see all 526 pages. It's beautiful. I mean, when you look at it, when I traveled with it, I would be somewhere and I'd have the opportunity to present it to a group, and I'd open the book and people would just gasp. They would feel the energy of it. And the consistency of the scribing of it, the thesis is that it was done by one scribe, and the cover on the book that you'll see was actually a replacement. We do not have the original cover. And as we move forward, we want to open up as much as we can of what are all the energetic understandings that go beneath everything that is said when we can get close to the Aramaic meanings. And these are meanings that developed energetically over a long period of time, coming out of, I've said before, the Aramaic letters are shadows of, if you were to take a picture of the atomic structure of the elements, several of the elements, the 3D shadow that would be cast by that element would be the Aramaic letter. And there's, if you want to look into that a little more, there's a gentleman named Tannen, I believe it's Tannen, and he made that his study, looking at the Aramaic language. If you do a search for that, I'm sure you'll come up with it. I don't have the website offhand, but he was the one who came up with this idea, or that the Aramaic was actually grounded in the physics of the world. And the documentation in the manuscript says that it was authored, or the original manuscript was about 100 years after Nero went after Christianity in about 65 AD. And there may be older manuscripts. There was a thing in the Middle East. First of all, if you were to have a manuscript, it was because your family had money. And if you had money and you were interested in scriptures, you would then hire a scribe and you'd have a copy made. And of course, you know, humans are humans, mistakes are made. But this particular manuscript is a copy of the Shitta. Now, there's a story out there in the world by Greek scholars. Again, remember that if Yeshua were to sit in most circles today, he'd say that's all Greek to me. The Greek scholars say, no. That the Shitta is a copy of the Greek original writing. Well, I mean, you can have all kinds of scholarly arguments about that point, but here's where, for me, the rubber meets the road. When you go to the Aramaic, every passage makes sense. If you go to the Greek, there's so many passages, as we started out with last week or two. There's so many passages, it just don't make any sense. the ideas are clearly, many of them clearly simply foolish. And so where the Greek scholars or so-called scholars will tell you, oh, no, it was all written down in Greek first, and then they came along and translated the shit from that. I would offer, there's no sense arguing over that. Just go look at the meanings and see the consistency of the sensibility of the Aramaic meanings and the inconsistency in the meaning of the Greek translations. And it's easy to see which one came first. It's so dramatically evident over and over and over and over again when you look at those examples. In the first couple of days we did the study, we went through those ideas. So the whole manuscript is in Aramaic, and the script that was used was what's called a stranglio. And if you want to do some more research on that, that's the script that the text was physically written in. And I had made a mistake, or I had a misunderstanding that I've shared on the show recently in past times, that the Aramaic language was a parent language to the Hebrew. And according to some of the latest research that I've done in understanding, that was a mistaken idea. But the Aramaic was the language of the people. Hebrew was the language of the temple. And so what Yeshua was doing was taking the original ideas and expressing them in Aramaic to the average person. It wasn't designed for the elites or the learned. It was designed to take the gut core work, the tools, the how-to. And this is, for me, this is mainly what's missing in the Greek. Aside from a lot of nonsensical meanings, the how-to isn't there. No, we're told that when Yeshua was asked, what's most important in the law, he said, love your neighbor, love God as yourself. And that's just not even close to an accurate statement. In Aramaic, his instruction was havrakma, which meant keep the filter, the frontal lobes of your brain open, so that you love, your human life is present for your neighbor, for the Creator. So not loving them, but functioning as love in their presence. And then he goes on to say that this is how you maintain your human life, not love your neighbor as yourself, but maintain your human life by doing this. And then says, for upon this hangs the law and all the prophets. The understanding of this whole technology that was presented. It is a technology that was presented by Yeshua 2,000 years ago. It hangs on that. If you don't have that, all your mind can do is show you what was replicated from your past. So you'll read the text and you'll think you're reading the words on the page, but your mind will project into it all of the history, all of the resonance of past generations in regard to that particular idea. So when the word neighbor comes up, if there's the enemy over there and the enemy over there and the fight that happened here and the guy next door that hates you, and all of that comes into it, then you're going to try and love your neighbor. You're going to try and be nice to him, but what he resonates in you is rage. Yeshua says, no, you've got to do the work to clean up that rage so that you can achieve this state of love, because upon this hangs the whole understanding. You've got to leave the mind of man behind. Remember that when he told Peter he was acting as Satan, for you think in the mind of man, and you've got to step into that other realm. That's what everything hangs on. And so that's kind of a starting point for us to move to the next level. And I appreciate you being with us, and we'll look forward to the conversation continuing tomorrow. Have the best year yet of your eternal life.